About 4 years ago, I was driving home at night from a major city where I'd been hanging out with my friend. The drive is about 2 hours, and towards the end of the drive, when I was about 30 minutes from my house, I started falling asleep. I tried hard to stay awake, loud music, even slapping myself. It was probably around 1 a.m. by that point, and I was crazy tired. I couldn't pull over because I was traveling through a military base and there were no off ramps nearby. After a few head nods, where my neck would snap back reflexively and I'd wake up, I finally really fell asleep. But I was woken up by a loud voice shouting directly in my ear, "Wake up!" I was luckily still on the highway and no cars were around, and I gained control of the car. I was so freaked out, so scared, that I was wide awake for the rest of the drive. I couldn't believe how much it sounded like someone really was in my car, in the back seat, and screamed as loud as they could into my ear. I was so freaked out. For me, time makes all memories fade, even the crazy and/or profound moments, but the realness of that experience has stuck with me. I know how powerful our brains are, and I always figured that somehow my subconscious came to the rescue that night and woke my ass up. This has fascinated me. I truly believe our unconscious mind could pull off such a trick, but why don't other people get saved like that? And is there a known scientific reason how this could happen? I was thinking about this just the other day and Googled it to see if anyone else had ever had this happen to them. I figured it had to be fairly common. I couldn't find any anecdotal instances of it happening, which I find odd, but maybe my search was not hitting the right words. What kept coming up was exploding head syndrome, an abnormal sensory perception during sleep in which a person experiences unreal noises that are loud and of short duration when falling asleep or waking up. Wiki. So I've been thinking about this, and I've definitely experienced this in bed while falling asleep. Hearing a shout and being jolted awake. I've had crazy dreams or nightmares since I was a kid, so I've dealt with crazy sleep issues, including sleep paralysis. Wiki says EHS might be caused by temporal lobe seizures. And while I'm not convinced hearing a voice equals a seizure, I do think the temporal lobe is a good candidate. And when I was a child, a doctor speculated I may have some type of temporal lobe disorder when I was having frequent nightmares, waking nightmares, sleep paralysis, and sleepwalking. So it seems like it could have been EHS, but was it coincident that I happened to be driving and needed to be woken up at that moment? Maybe. But the sound in my ear of that voice was different from my other experiences of being jolted by a shout as I'm falling asleep in bed. And it's usually a wordless shout or loud noise. This voice seemed to scream the words, "Wake up." And it really sounded more and felt more realistic. Freaked me the hell out. I've often wondered if it was something paranormal. Something or someone woke me up. Or was it my brain? This happened in 2013 at a house in which my wife and I lived for 23 years. And on January 1st to 2nd, about midnight at the end of New Year's Day. The house was across a 2-lane road from a locally well-known creek, lined with woody corridors on both sides. I was at the kitchen table on the internet. My wife was with our dog, outside for the final time before bed. She came bustling into the mudroom at the back of the house, next to the kitchen, unharnessed the dog, and came to the kitchen door a bit out of breath. She said, "Hun, I think you should go outside and see about something." She explained that while she and the dog were out on the front lawn, she heard someone walking down the middle of the creek. This was not a normal occurrence at any time of the day or year, but especially at midnight in winter. The creek was partially frozen, with a thin layer of ice in some places, but open, flowing water in others. The creek is deep enough for canoes to navigate during summer. There were a few streetlights, the light of which is partially obscured by the wood corridor between them and the creek. Even the dog heard this activity, turning and looking toward the creek. According to her, it sounded like regular, heavy, bipedal walking by someone of size, not like a quadrupedal animal such as a deer. The level of the creek is about 10 feet lower than the surrounding terrain, so that to see down into it, one would have to go to the opposite shoulder of the road and stand by the long guardrail that runs there. Whomever this walker was, the direction of travel was eastward, downstream, headed toward eventually emptying into a large lake near the next town. My wife was reluctant to cross the road and look. I should hurry if I want to hear it. So I got on my coat and went out, but it was too late to hear the footsteps. Carrying a flashlight, I went to the guardrail. No one and nothing but the creek. So I decided to take a look in the morning, in case there was a trackway. And the next morning, I did find what looked like a bipedal trackway made by hominin feet. It was right down the center of the creek, but it was too far for me to get a clear idea about further characteristics. I couldn't judge the footprints' size or whether they were shod. Their stride was long, but I had no way of measuring how long. This was during the period 1994 to 95, beginning in September. My wife and I had recently bought a Victorian house. One Sunday night, I was lying on my back in bed, just trying to put myself in the frame of mind for sleep. My wife was in the bathroom, prepping for bed. Then she came to bed. We switched off the light and tried to settle down. In a short while, she was asleep. I, like some people, seem to need to go through a series of postures when trying to enter sleep. I start on my back, then turn over to my left side for a while. Then I turn onto my stomach, facing right. Then on my stomach, facing left. Then onto my right side, where I finally enter sleep. It's a process. On this particular night, as I was laying on my back, first stage. It's dark. My wife is asleep beside me. And I feel something about the weight of a cat quickly crossing the foot of the bed, even stepping lightly on my lower legs as it approaches the right side of the foot of the bed. We didn't have a cat or even a dog at the time. Then immediately afterward, something much heavier, what feels like the weight of a person, abruptly sits down at the spot on the foot of the bed. I give a little cry of surprise and sit up in the darkness, groggily waking my wife, and nothing is there on the bed. Now forward approximately 7 months, sometime in April. We've settled into bed, lights out. I'm back on my back. This time, there are no footsteps, but something again abruptly sits in the same old spot at the bed. My reaction is the same, and there's once more nothing discernible there. Again, forward about 7 months, and it's November. Same scene, no footsteps, but whatever or whomever sits in the same spot on the bed, and this time leans back so that I can feel its pressure against my lower right leg. The results are otherwise completely the same. You'd think I would have learned a different response by then, but no. After this third occasion, there was no more recurrences. I maintain that I was not asleep, the timing of these events being too early in my sleep cycle. I'm very well conversant with the stages of the sleep cycle. I was also in complete control of my body on each occasion, and had no difficulty quickly springing up in surprise. My friend and I were sitting at my kitchen table, talking about rather disturbing topics that we didn't want anyone to hear us speaking of. Mind you, my sister and dad are present in the house, and there are 3 dogs, which were all in the kitchen with us at the time this occurred. As we were talking about these topics, I saw my friend's gaze shift to the doorway of the kitchen, and I heard a door shut right as we were looking. She had a rather shocked type look on her face, so I automatically assumed it was one of the 2 people entering the kitchen who had just heard our conversation. So I looked at her and said, "Shh," indicating that we should shift conversation subjects to something more family friendly. When I told her to be quieter, she looked at me and shook her head and said, "Something just ran through your living room." Okay, so my sister's room is connected to the living room. We live in an older house, so everything is built weird. And the closet in my sister's room has a door inside of it leading to the living room. No one uses that door. The junk in the closet mostly blocks it off. She told me to ask my sister if she came out of that door or at least slammed it to scare us. But my sister notified us from across the house that it wasn't her. When I asked my friend to describe what she had seen, she said it was a person on all fours, but the back legs were like those of a deer. I only saw the back half of it for the most part because of how swiftly it moved. It was all black, almost like a solid shadow. The living room had no lights on at the time, just the light from the hallway shining into the room. I really believe her because she's not one to lie about stuff like this, and I also heard the door slam in the living room while she was looking in there. As of today, I'm at least the third person to experience sleep paralysis for the first time in this house. I got overwhelmingly tired and then was not awake but not asleep. I was having strange dream fragments, but was hyper aware of my actual surroundings. The dreams would change rapidly. The only one I can specifically recall was my friend from high school finding love. The rest of it, I would realize I couldn't move and try to fight it. I tried to yell out and I couldn't. I've had recurring nightmares of being chased by things like bears and not being able to scream in the past. But this was different, like I was under attack. My fiancé kept coming in and trying to wake me, but as soon as he'd walk in, the feeling of being under attack would go away, and I'd mumble things like, "I'm too tired," even when I'd been desperately fighting to wake up seconds before. He walked out to do some cleaning and it would start back up. I felt something step on the bed in a way that caused me to lean slightly more towards the area that the attic entrance is in our room, which my back had been turned towards. I felt my body turning as if by gravity. It wasn't like gravity got turned up or down, my body just started to turn. It started feeling hard to breathe. The air felt thick, and my diaphragm didn't want to work to bring in air and out. I felt like I was dying, and I remember having that thought. My fiancé came in again. I barely mumbled out, "I keep having sleep paralysis," and he didn't realize the urgency and thought I meant for him to let me sleep. Next thing I know, I'm in the living room in my fiancé's gaming chair, fighting to stay awake. I vaguely remember him coming in one more time and feeling some relief, but I don't remember getting up and leaving the room, which isn't normal. I have hypermobility and joint pain. Getting up takes a lot of effort usually. He got me some coffee to help wake me up and went to do some tidying in the room. And suddenly, he felt something stand on the mattress by him as well. I went to him to get a few things, and the air felt thicker and dizzying, even though we just got a screen so we can keep our window open, because it's the hottest room in the house. My fiancé had a dog before he met me, and stayed in the same room. One night, he woke up to a squeezing feeling in his lungs, and he couldn't move. Frozen, looking at the attic while his dog looked at it as well, while growling. He also had a similar incident while we were camping in the backyard last summer, after we had met. The landlord's stepson used to sleep in the garage, and he also had at least one sleep paralysis incident, where he saw black orbs. He also saw the landlord outside the kitchen window once, but the landlord wasn't home, and what he saw had red eyes. My fiancé saw a face outside the same window once too, but it was gone before we could make out any detail. Any tips on keeping whatever this is at bay, at least until we save up enough to move out, would be greatly appreciated. Prior to this, I'd only experienced things like being knocked over or disappearing, and showing up in places we either already looked at or haven't been in since before we lost them. This happened during Ramadan in 2017, when me and my family went for a vacation in Dubai. My sister chose the hotel for which we would stay in for a couple of weeks, and everything looked decent. I don't remember the name of the hotel, but it was a 3 or 4-star hotel with good food and amazing service. Now, to the story. The city was beautiful, and there was so much to do, but during our stay in Dubai, me and my family were all fasting, and with that, Not much could have been explored, but we still made the best out of it. Our second week of the vacation was a casual day of fasting, and breaking of the fast was around the evening. My family wanted to go to the city for the night and have fun, but I wanted nothing less than to chill. I'm not a fan of Dubai's heat, and this heat was killing me. Once they left, I got really bored after some time alone in the room, so I left the hotel and wandered around the area, and I really liked the environment. After some time wandering, I went back to the hotel. Once I got to the hotel and greeted the guy behind the reception, I steadily went for the elevator and pressed number 9 to the hotel room. This is where it gets very weird. On the 9th floor, there are 8 hotel rooms and an air freshener on the right side once you get off the elevator, but the air freshener's gone. I thought to myself, okay, they must have taken it away. As I walked to the room, my keycard wouldn't open, and after several tries, I just gave up and looked around to see if I was on the right floor. Everything, and I mean everything, indicated that I was on the 9th floor. Elevator indication was on 9. All hotel rooms on that floor started with 9, and I remember looking at my hotel room and seeing the correct numbers on the door. That's when I realized that it was too quiet. So very quiet that hearing the very fabric of the carpet I was standing on was the only thing making a sound. I picked up my phone, and the last message received was from my sister saying, "We're at the hotel room, half an hour ago," but I had no reception on the phone. I couldn't remember if I once lost reception in the hotel, but it happened just then. At this point, I was very confused and somewhat startled, so I started knocking on the door to the hotel room, but nothing. The sound on the other side? No, nothing. I started banging and still nothing. I remember our neighbours and how nice they were, so I went for their door to see if someone would answer, and still nothing. No sound. This is where I panicked. I started banging on every door on the 9th floor, and I still couldn't get a response. At this point, the only thing moving and making sound was me. I placed my ear on every door. All I could hear was abstinence. I felt so alone and wanted nothing but to get back to my family. And then my dumbass thought of the elevator and sprinted my way to it and pressed ground floor. I made it down and saw the receptionist, and I haven't been so happy to see another human like I was at that moment. Went back to the elevator, but this time I took the one to the right instead of the left like I did before. Pressed 9, and as soon as I stepped off, I saw the air freshener to the right, and my neighbour leaving their hotel room, which I was making my way to my door. Before using my door keycard, I heard my family behind that door, and the happiness that struck me was overwhelming, to the point that I was about to shed some manly tears. Unlocked it, and went straight to bed. Quick backstory info. Me and my family moved into this house around 4 years ago, so this is 4 years of creepy moments. By the way, please give some advice, as you'll find out in the post, I think I'm in danger. First experiences? The first couple were just small ones when we first moved in. Like the first night, there was just some creepy vibes about the kitchen. When we finally got the house set up, I would see a dark hand close my bedroom door. Frequent nightmares, and me and my brother would wake up with scratches. I have extremely small nails due to anxiety, so it doesn't make sense how I'd have scratches that literally had cut me on me. We also don't have pets, and I didn't have a partner at this time. One time, me and my brother also found footprints in the shape of a boot on the roof, but that one could have been someone killing a spider. We're still not really sure. The second couple of instances are a bit more extreme, but not too much. One time my mum had a friend come stay, and at dinner, and in my house, we have a hallway that leads straight from the front door to the living room, which is an open space sort of floor plan. So while eating, this lady looks into the hallway and just stares with this weird look on her face. No one really says much, and she tells my mum something. Later that night we're talking, and I tell this lady about the weird shit that's been happening. And she proceeds to tell me that at dinner, she saw a tall man in the hallway and that he went into the garage that's connected to the hallway as well. But my mum told me just to not believe it. Another couple of things were, one time I had a school project to film a vlog, and when going back over the footage from inside my house, in the video, you can see my glass start moving by itself while my back's turned. Wish I still had the video, but this was around 3 years ago. And over the years, my mum finally told me that when she's home alone, she sometimes hears weird things or will see a shadow run past. There was also another time in my early teens where one of my boyfriends stayed at my house while alone, and he went to the garage to get a drink, and it sounded like someone whispered in his ear. He ended up telling me later that night and was extremely freaked out, but I don't know how much of it was true. Now on to the most recent and, in my opinion, creepy stuff. As of late, I've been having these dreams. They're like nightmares, but I know I'm awake. Best way to describe it is it's sort of like an Inception, but I fully know I'm in the dream. So anyways, in these dreams, it will always be my mum in them, and it always will start with me and her. And I'll say, I know this is a dream. I know you're not really her. And the dream mum will agree. And usually the dreams aren't scary, or they don't try to harm me. I just get obviously freaked out and start screaming, I need to leave. And the dream versions of my family try to help me leave. And then I wake up having an anxiety attack. I didn't think these dreams held much significance until recently though. About 2 weeks ago, I had another of these dreams, but this one was different. It felt darker, like I was in danger. The dream people were dream versions of my family, like always. And I told my dream mum that I know this is a dream, and I'd like to leave, like always. Except this time she kind of morphed, and in the dream told me she was a demon and that I couldn't leave. The rest of the dream is sort of a blur, but I remember getting attacked by my dream family. And in the dream, it felt like I was glitching out of that dream and into another dream. Eventually I woke up and the time was 3 a.m. and I stayed awake after that and was thoroughly freaked out. Ever since that dream though, I've been waking up every night at exactly 3 a.m. No matter how late or how early I go to sleep, without fail, it will be 3 a.m. I've always just been terrified of my room as of late. I don't know why. I can't really explain it, but I just don't feel safe or welcome in my own room. And it's only felt like this since that dream. Another thing, around 3 days ago, my boyfriend stayed over. I was very tired, so we went to sleep about 10 p.m. Room was pitch black, but I have a built-in wardrobe with my TV inside one of the sides, so the doors were open for that side. I don't know what time it was, but I get woken up by my boyfriend, and half asleep and annoyed, I'm like, what? And my boyfriend is just pointing at my wardrobe while laying down and goes, the people are upside down. I'm like, what people? And he still just points at the wardrobe and goes, the people. Half asleep, I just assumed he was talking about my plushies and fucking with me, so I just grumbled and went back to sleep. I then woke up again at 3 a.m, where we both got up and watched a movie. While watching the movie, I was like, so why did you wake me up to tell me the people are upside down? And he just looks at me and goes, what? And I repeated myself laughing again for him to just go, that never happened. I slept through the whole night. After asking him over and over if he was fucking with me, he held his ground that he didn't know what I was talking about. Last night, my fiancé and I met up with 2 of my friends from high school to drink and play board games. My 2 high school friends, I'll call them C and W, were determined to get my fiancé drunk as it was their first time meeting him. We were at W's house for the night, and C volunteered to sleep on the couch while my fiancé and I took the guest bedroom. After quite a few hours of drinking, my fiancé felt sick, so we decided to go to bed in the guest bedroom. For some reason, I was too anxious to fall asleep. I was only able to fall asleep around 7 a.m. the next morning. In my dream, I was woken up by C and W talking in the hallway, outside the bedroom door. C was saying goodbye, and as I closed my eyes again, I heard his car leaving the driveway. We asked through the door if my fiancé and I were awake. I remember very sleepy saying, No, not yet. I fell back asleep until an hour or so later, when an older woman came in the room and woke us up. As she woke us, I heard what sounded like W getting sick and even crying in the bathroom across the hall. She looked at me and said, "Hey y'all, W isn't feeling too good, so you might want to pack it up and leave soon." I remember her voice pretty distinctly, and she had a thick southern accent that sounded more like Mississippi or Alabama than the part of Louisiana we're from. She had short white hair, and her eyebrows were penciled on the way older southern ladies like to do it. She had said some other things to us, but I can't remember what they were. She was really sweet and kind about it, and helped us pack our belongings and go. I woke up around 10 a.m. completely confused as to where I was. The dream was so vivid that I was fully expecting to wake up in my own bed, not back in the guest room of that house. I told my fiancée about it because it had shook me up a bit. I ended up laying awake in bed until I decided I needed to go and start cleaning up the mess from the night before. A little while later, WC and my fiancée all ended up joining me in the living room. We were all talking about the night before, and I decided to tell W and C about my weird dream. When I started describing the woman from my dream, W's face went pale. He asked me for a few more details before he looked at me and simply said, "My step-grandmother died in this house." At first I thought he was kidding, until he pulled out his phone and showed me a picture. There she was, the woman from my dream, dressed up and posed lovingly next to W's grandfather. Apparently, she was from Mississippi and had a thick accent as well. He asked me to imitate how she had said his name in my dream, and he laughed a little, saying that sounded exactly like her. I was a bit freaked out, so I helped finish cleaning up our mess and then drove my fiancée and our home. "So, ma'am, I'm sorry we made your grandson sick from drinking, and thank you for letting us stay at your house. But please, don't scare me like that again." My best friend, I'll call her Gray, and I wanted to hang out, so we decided to go for a hike. I chose a reservation I'd been to multiple times before, so that we could still have hope of navigating through the long trails in case we got lost. In hindsight, it was a pretty weird decision to go hiking considering it was mid-February in New England, and it was still pretty cold out. This day in particular was especially foggy and colder than we had expected. We took the bus to the northern entrance of the reservation and headed toward the southern entrance, about a 4.5 hour long trail. This was Gray's first time visiting the reservation, so she was attempting to take photos along the way. I say attempting because whenever she took her phone out, she'd managed to snap a few photos before her phone would shut off and restart because of the cold. My phone wouldn't even turn on at all. Nearing the end of the trail, we come across an extremely picturesque setting. A large barren tree with a wooden swing attached to the largest branch on the edge of a frozen foggy pond. The first people we saw since we arrived was a man swinging a little girl, probably around 4 years old, wearing a bright pink jacket. We got closer and Gray manages to take a handful of photos before her phone repeats the cycle of death. She tells me that she wants to swing after they leave, so we wait patiently, giving them enough space not to ruin their little moment. Not even 10 minutes into waiting, we notice that the man has stopped pushing the little girl and instead is just standing there, staring right at us, without any expression on his face. Gray and I turn around to avoid the creepy eye contact for a few seconds, and when we turn back around, the man is coming straight at us on an all-black unicycle. Gray screams, and right before he crashes into us, he makes a sharp turn straight into the woods. I'll never forget how creepy the man's face was. He had absolutely no emotion at all and literally looked pale as a ghost, almost green in the face. We looked back at the little girl to see her struggling to run after him, eventually disappearing into the woods as well. Gray and I debated going after the little girl for a while, but decided not to since neither of our phones were turning on, and we still had about half an hour to reach the southern exit of the reservation. I started pushing Gray on the swing, and as we're trying to dissect what the fuck just happened and where this man got a unicycle from, something across the pond catches my attention. I can barely see it through the fog, but quickly realise from the bright pink colour that the little girl was watching us from between the trees. What makes this even crazier is that the man and the little girl disappeared into the woods heading east, and the other side of the pond was west of where Gray and I were. This little girl didn't nearly have enough time to have gone all the way around us without either of us noticing. I point it out to Gray and she immediately jumps off the swing, and we both start running to the exit without exchanging a word until we're in the clear. We walked about another 45 minutes until we reached civilization again and found a place to eat. We go in and Gray plugs her phone into an outlet so that he can turn it back on. And we look through all the photos. All of the photos from the day are there except the last 4 photos he took of the man and the little girl. In their place were just plain black thumbnails with an error message that read "File not found" when we tried to view them. To this day, we cannot make sense of that situation. I went back to that reservation several times afterward and tried avoiding that pond at all costs. The one time I did revisit the pond area was because of a dare with a group of friends, only to discover something equally as strange. It was around 9 p.m. and completely dark, and there was a group of about 20 or 30 people having a picnic in what looked like colonial-era clothing. We creeped on them for a few minutes and decided to head back before they noticed us. Maybe it was an Amish group bonding, but I don't know. But the fact that they were having a picnic without any sort of lights or lanterns in the middle of the woods was pretty weird. I was doing my mandatory military service in the Finnish Defence Forces as military police, and during the time I captured this clip, I kept watching at one of the checkpoints that would lead to the military base or garrison, whatever you call it. The sounds continued for approximately 45 minutes, to around 11:15 p.m. When the sound started to vanish, it felt like it was getting quieter with each noise it made. It wasn't sudden, unlike when it started. I don't really know when it did start, because I was inside our security booth, but when I heard it, I rushed outside to check it out and listen. My pal was with me and noticed it too. After the noises ended, I didn't hear them again. I remember someone telling me they heard the same noises exactly the day before around midnight. I wasn't there then to witness it, unfortunately. Around the area of the incident, the base itself was quiet back then, because the time was close to midnight and there wouldn't be any action at that time. And if there were, then we'd most certainly know about it, no doubt. There is, however, a town, or city you could almost say. It was close by, approximately 1.5 kilometers away. The city is technically a ghost town around this time, and even during rush hour, it's really nothing special. Very quiet and kind of eerie place, I'd call it. There's a central fire station nearby, but that's unlikely the source of the sound. Also, some rural industries are located nearby, but again, those are most likely not very active around this time. If I had to guess where the source of this is coming from, it'd be the big water tower just located across the road from the base. It's mostly made up of concrete. It hasn't been making any noise before then. And during the time I filmed this, it wasn't that windy at all. But maybe someone knows more about water towers than I do. Also, worth mentioning is that a one-track trial road is located quite close. But as far as I know, no cargo is transported on this. Only driving specific times, a rural rail bus line will be driving here, and it certainly wouldn't make this noise. A small bay is located on the other side of the base, but only small motor and sailboats are able to operate in these waters. And during this time of the year, I don't think anyone would be riding there in pitch black darkness. No attempt could be made to debunk it simply because I couldn't leave my post, and it was extremely hard to locate the sound. It did sound like it was coming from the woods, but that's a risky bet to make. A lot was spoken about the incident the next day, but it was a mystery that never, as far as I know, returned. Now, I'm not saying in the military anymore, because I was moved to the reserve, but it'd be fun to know if those people serving there now have been hearing stuff like this. Who knows? This was a little over a year ago. My family and extended family, aunts and uncles, etc., went on a vacation to Louisville, Kentucky. We stayed at this massive house with 4 floors. I probably got the worst room. It was the first room when you entered the house, and it had a twin-sized bed with no TV. Additionally, it was pretty hot there. The first night was fine. I slept fine and nothing happened. The following day, I was complaining about my room because the bed wasn't comfortable, and everyone else got these grand rooms with king-sized beds and an ensuite. My uncle and his daughter, my cousin, offered to switch rooms with me. They were staying in the attic. It was not a traditional attic, as it had its own bathroom, kitchen, and living area. I agreed because in hindsight, it was a really bad trade on their part. Or so I thought. The night comes, and I go to the attic. And me being a teenager at the time was reminiscing on my ex-boyfriend just laying in bed. I was on my phone until I heard what I thought was my brother, as he likes to play a lot of tricks on me. It was this eerie, insane sound that I can only describe as a fully sized adult running in my walls. It had only lasted for a few seconds, but felt like 5 minutes. I FaceTime my brother and his girlfriend, who accompanied us on the trip. They answer, and I nervously laugh, asking if that were them. By the way, their room was directly below the attic, so it only made sense that it could have been them. They were a bit confused and asked me what I was talking about. With my heart rate increasing, I nervously laugh and brush them off, saying stuff like, "I know that was you guys." I only soon realised it wasn't them, because their faces grew to be concerned. I run down the stairs into their room and practically beg them to admit it was them, to ease my fear. We all agreed to go back into the attic to check it out. My brother split apart from me and his girlfriend, and went into the kitchen while me and his girlfriend went to where I had heard the sound. After a few brief moments, my brother comes in with his face full of fear. He exclaimed that we needed to get out of there ASAP. I later found he had heard the noise of an adult running in the walls. We go to his room and we try to think of a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a raccoon or other animal. No animal sounds that heavy. Maybe it was another family member. No, we texted everyone and no one responded until the morning. Eventually, we gave up on the idea of rationalizing it. I slept on my brother and his girlfriend's room floor. In the middle of the night, my brother's girlfriend and I heard an excruciating ear knocking on the bedroom door. We both thought we had heard it in our dreams, so we brushed it off, until I had mentioned it in the morning. Her face turned pale, and she scarily admits she heard it too, and she thought it was in her dream as well. I tell the whole family about it, and of course, no one believes us. I refused to go back up there until my mom had agreed to go back up with me to pack up my things. To this day, although I had never seen anything, that was the scariest night of my life. I'm Venezuelan, and I had to leave the country to go to the US to live there for personal reasons. My big sister already has a family in her own house, and she was already living in the US. So she let my family and I stay in her house for the first 2 weeks. We bought a house and moved there quite quickly. The story takes place about 3 days after we moved into the new house. Since it hadn't even been a week since we moved, we were still getting used to everything. I've always been a person that can fall asleep quickly and easily, but I wake up many times during the night. After I wake up, I usually walk around the house or do something that calms me, so that it's easier for me to get back to sleep. This night was no different. I left my bedroom to go downstairs and maybe eat a midnight snack or something. When you exit my bedroom, you can see the small upstairs hallway, and the stairs are right next to my bedroom door. The rest of the hallway has a railing that lets you look down to the rest of the stairs after they make a turn. When I got out, I saw an extremely tall man looking down the railing. This man was completely black. He was more like a shadow. Since I couldn't see his facial features, the only thing I could remember was that he was really tall. He wore a hat, and he was wearing a jacket. I'm that type of person that becomes frozen when faced with fear, So I didn't take off running, nor did I scream. After a while, he disappeared, but the scary thing isn't even that. 2 days after this incident, my sister woke up in the middle of the night too. Nobody knew what I had seen, not even her, and I told her everything. She was going to go downstairs, but noticed that the bathroom door was open. We don't like it when we leave the door to the bathroom open because it kind of feels like the hallway is part of the bathroom. She went to go to close it, but she felt like somebody was forcing the door open so that she wasn't able to close it. She thought it was my brother, but when she looked inside, she saw the same man I had seen with the hat and the jacket. The next morning she told me what she had seen and I told her my story. We both still don't know what the heck it was, but it's been 2 years since it happened, and we haven't seen him since then. It was about 2 years ago when I had a, by my standards, not so strange dream that for unclear reasons left a huge impression on me. It went something like this. I stood in a long, white, arched hallway in front of a stand that sold books. I blindly reached into a tray full of them, thinking in my head I might look, since these will be cheaper because it's a Chinese stand. I pulled out It by Stephen King and got very excited. I went through the pages swiftly and noted that I will definitely buy this book here. I put it back and turned from the stand. Suddenly, next to it was a big doorway, elevated a few stairs from the ground. I walked up the stairs, went through, and went down a few more wooden stairs again, before stopping on a red carpet. I stood in a bookstore, not really fancy. All that stood out from the white walls were the tall, dark wooden bookshelves, same dark floor and red carpet, and a big black hole in the ground to my left. That's where the feeling began. I got really bad vibes from that hole. There was no end in sight when looking down, no sound, anything, but I still felt definitely not in danger, but terrible. And then I woke up and couldn't forget about that dream. About a month or two afterwards, I went on a school trip to the UK. It was wonderful, and I spent most of my time with a friend that I shared a room with. One of the last days we spent in London, and we parted for a bit because I wanted to spend more time in the National Gallery. My plan was clear. Go through the gallery and head to Chinatown. I was in London before when I was younger and remember it being lovely. But then, after I was done viewing the exhibition, she ran up to me and asked me to come to the bookstore with her for the last remaining half hour. And because I was tired from walking around, I forgot about Chinatown. And to the bookstore we went. I was happy. It was a nice one, multiple floors and all. I walked down the stairs and froze. The dream suddenly reappeared in my head and I got a bit sweaty. Lower floor, dark floorboard, red carpet, tall wooden bookshelves. Chills. But hey, I decided to look for it and buy the book if I find it. I didn't. And my friend didn't find the book she was looking for either. And she started to get pissed. And I thought, here are the bad vibes. Literally, the whole remaining free time we got, she spent trying to get the employee to get her the book they didn't have. She was so disappointed, impatient and sad. And I assumed hungry. It was a little bit funny. When we finally went back to rejoin the rest, my other friend came up to me and asked me if I was in Chinatown. That was my cue to be disappointed. How could I have forgotten? I told him and said no, and he said, that's a shame. It was a guy cosplaying Pennywise. We all took photos with him. Yes, as a huge horror fan, I was pissed. And I learned that dreams are no fun. As a super small child, I used to be terrified of a doll my grandfather had that had been handmade for my mother when she was younger. I literally had repeating nightmares where this thing came to visit me for most of my childhood, and even occasionally as a teenager and adult. The last time I was around it physically was shortly after my grandmother died, and I still felt uneasy looking directly at it, even at 25 years old. My mum sold it during an estate sale to a woman in the town, when my grandmother died, and it's lost as far as I know. I'd always written off this phobia as just some weird irrational childhood fear, because Raggedy Ann dolls are creepy as hell, especially when they're homemade, and it assumed it was normal. But the hold this doll had on me that made me feel as if it was staring into the depths of my soul, constantly. Then something crazy happened. The Conjuring movies came out, and after doing research, I discovered the real-life version of the Annabelle doll matched the Raggedy Ann version on my grandmother head almost perfectly. I know most of this is just a coincidence, but I've always felt that something was off about this doll. It harbored bad energy. Oddly enough, after all of this, I've inquired about this doll to my mother because I feel I have this weird connection to it. She told me she never kept it in the house around me when I was younger because I always cried and became hysterical at night when it was around, so she gave it to my grandmother. I'm just imagining me finding this thing, then driving it home in the middle of the night, and crazy shit starts happening. For the record, I don't believe in ghosts or spirits, but I will go to my grave saying I picked up on something evil from this doll as a kid. I really wish I had a picture to share, but I honestly avoided this thing as much as possible, and always felt it was looking at me from around a corner at night. So I'm going to start off by saying that I do indeed suffer from mental illness, and have done so from a young age. But because of this, 99% of the time, I can tell if it's reality or not. If not at some point during a certain time when looking back on it. When I was a kid, I would always say and do odd things. I'd stare into random corners of the house. My imaginary friend was always around. My sister told me that one time she was carrying me to bed, and I dead set looked at her and said, "Cookies behind you," with a spooky little grin. She booked it. I'd also have my ways of working things out stupidly fast, such as climbing out of my relatively tall crib and then over the safety gate, pretty much as soon as I could walk. I even remember doing it. I was a bloody master. I never believed in Santa, but played along to make my mum happy. It just feels like I skipped a stage in my childhood. As I got older, I continued to be odd. At 6, I told my mum I saw an angel at the end of my bed, telling me it would all be okay. I remember seeing a small dwarf-like shadow zip past me, and I ran out of my room screaming. But then felt guilty and went back to my room and apologised to whatever it was for screaming at it. There was also a stair ghost, who I would race to the bottom of the stairs whenever I would go down them. Like I said, I'm diagnosed with mental health issues, but these events feel real, whereas at the time, a time traveller was observing me felt real at the time, but it was a clear delusion. The thing that freaked me out most recently was a dream I had. In the dream, I was a little kid again and was telling my dad something, but we were at the old house, the one I grew up in. And I went through this back room that wasn't in the real house, and it connected to the living room, to the kitchen by going under the stairs. I was telling my mum about it and she looked shocked. Apparently, there was a room there and it was exactly as I described it. I even drew it out to confirm and she was just speechless. The room was sealed for years before I was born, and no one talked about it as it was just forgotten about. There's no real way I could have known about it and its exact layout unless it was discussed in front of me as a child, and I retained this random fact without knowing, and then had unprovoked dreams of it. Unexplained. I live in Philadelphia, pretty close to Old City. It's a neighborhood on the border of the city, just at the foot of the Ben Franklin Bridge. Part of Old City contains the historic Philadelphia area, where you'd find the Liberty Bell, Independence Hall, the Constitution Center, and the Betsy Ross House, to name a few. I had just gotten a new BMX bike, a hobby I'm revisiting after many years. This was the summer of 2020 on a Friday, I believe in August. It was one of those hot, muggy summer nights, and was pretty late in the evening, close to midnight. I'd been riding down at Penn's Landing, a dock that's a hot skate and BMX spot. After riding a session, I cruised a bit past South Street. You might recognise South Street in the Always Sunny intro. And then came up behind the Betsy Ross house. I realised that I passed this area constantly, but the last time I had actually walked around Independence Mall, the name for this area that has a few historic sites condensed within, was way back in 5th grade for a field trip. As I mentioned, it was late in the evening. No tour guides. In fact, nobody at all except one guy stretching to go for a run and 2 security guards. No tourists. Good time to explore. I cut through an alley where Betsy Ross's house is and wind up behind Independence Hall. It's on a cobblestone road that's really wide, so I hopped off my bike and walked across. On that other side is a large plaza with a park. This is Constitution Center. Somewhere off to the left side, opposite to the Liberty Bell, there's a large patch of grass. You could even call it a small field. On those grounds, there are 2 or 3 colonial homes that are probably older than America itself. I take notice, hop on my bike and start cruising up the U pathway that takes you past the front door of the Constitution Center. I'm going very slow, pulling out my phone to change the song in my earbuds on Spotify as I'm riding colonial field houses on my left. I saw a lady walking across the field out of the corner of my eye, and for maybe 2 or 3 seconds I didn't really think much of it or look. Maybe I thought, it's a lady walking. Then something registered subconsciously, like my brain was telling me to acknowledge something I wasn't paying attention to. So I did a double take, and I couldn't believe what my eyes saw. On this field was a woman in a gown. It was white, maybe with a light pink pastel colour or an off-white shade of some kind. This, in and of itself, is not what made me completely stop in my tracks, with no words and my jaw on the stone pathway. It was her gown and her hair. It was flowing, as if there was a breeze before a rainstorm. But like I said, it was the dead heat of humid August night. Basically, there was no wind. If I could give an example of what it looked like, if you've ever seen Ghostbusters, it was flowing like Sigourney Weaver in that scene after she becomes the gatekeeper, when Bill Murray pays her a visit at her apartment. The hairstyle and the dress style were much more modest. This is what alarmed me, but I'm a skeptic, so I kept an eye. She's walking straight toward one of these colonial homes. Strolling, actually. So slow. I looked at the colonial house and it had lights on downstairs and in one of the bedrooms on the 2nd floor. I didn't know what these houses were exactly, and Philly has countless homes that are registered as historic, but with someone living in them. I remember thinking, oh, it must be a wedding guest coming back from a reception, and that's where she's staying. She gets about 10 feet away from the porch, which has about 5 or 6 steps leading up to it. I shrug it off and start riding again. Just as I start pedaling, I look to my left again and froze. This lady starts going up the steps, but not walking. She was floating. If you can imagine a person not bending their knees, moving up and down as they step, that's what this looked like. When she got to the top of the steps and onto the porch, a couple of feet from the door, she turned her head to look at me. But her face flipped back around the other way. A point of reference for visuals would be Beetlejuice, when they have no face and turn their head. But no matter what, their empty face just comes back to the front. I believe this visual is also in the second Matrix movie, the 2 twins. I was in absolute fucking shock. I turned my head to the Constitution Center to see if one of the security guards was still there, but I didn't see them. When I turned back to look at this lady on the porch again, gone. No lights from inside the house. I couldn't have looked away for more than 3 seconds. The thing for me with anything otherworldly or mythical is whether I can discount parts of it. If there's a practical explanation for each remarkable point, I discredit it. My whole life I'd heard a number of stories from people who had ghost sightings, and some that even had house ghosts. Recurring poltergeists that essentially live in a certain spot, like someone's basement or bedroom. I've always been able to discount everything in every ghost story I've ever heard. That's why I was a skeptic, but this, I couldn't make any sense of it. For context, I'm in my early 20s and have had odd paranormal experiences happening for quite a few years now. I have many dream premonitions on a monthly basis. I travel far in my sleep. I've seen orbs a number of times, etc. I don't quite understand it all, but it happens. I've grown up using technology. I never really had any issues with technology in this way prior to 2 weeks ago. These issues happened all at once. Around 2 weeks ago, I left my dog and house sit for the parents of my best friend. They live about an hour out and just finished building their new house a little less than 2 years ago, so it was my first time seeing it and staying there. They live out in the country in an area I'd never been before, and the drive out of their place made me feel like I entered a different dimension in an inexplicable way. It wasn't a bad feeling. I just chalked it up to being way out in the country and my feeling more in tune with nature and whatnot. But it was really bizarre and indescribable. I passed through ghost towns and could feel a lot of heaviness. For anyone familiar, I was driving through the Irish Hills area of Michigan, headed west. Once I got to their house, I noticed my iPhone wasn't working very well at all. Majority of my texts weren't going through, and when I tried making calls, they would only go through like 20% of the time. I couldn't view or even delete or take any photos. It was saying my storage was full, even though it's a newer phone and I had recently paid for ample amounts of cloud storage. Apps would keep crashing over and over, etc. It was concerning to me just because I'm out of the house all by myself. The least I could have is a working phone. However, I chalked this up to being out in a new area and/or my phone just wasn't connecting well to their Wi-Fi. I was able to text the homeowners about it, and they sounded confused because their iPhones had never given them any issues. They couldn't help me. My phone went on for like this for 2 days before I was able to call Apple. They couldn't resolve my issue just from speaking on the phone, but they had suggested I reset it and make storage space. But about half an hour after hanging up with Apple, my phone started working normally again. It was weird. I felt like I was being taunted. But I was just glad my phone was working again. On the first night at their house, I was trying to use their television. I really wanted to watch the Pistons game that was on, so I turned on their ESPN streaming service. It wouldn't let me click or load the Pistons game, but it was letting me click on and watch literally every other live NBA game that was also streaming. When I had texted the homeowners about my phone not working well, I also mentioned how their TV wasn't letting me watch the specific game, and they were again confused, as their TV had never given them any issues. This same night, I began hearing loud bangs like someone dropped a bowling ball from upstairs, weird tapping noises, and even low mumbles, and somehow got myself to believing that these were all normal new house sounds, just for the sake of my sanity while I was staying there alone for 4 nights. The weird noises continued throughout my time there. My friend, her parents own the home, came and visited me a few days in, just to hang out. While she was there, we both heard the same exact loud noise that sounded like someone dropped something heavy from upstairs. We've had weird paranormal things happen while we're together, so we just laughed it off. That's when she told me that a few weeks ago, she was making dinner there alone and heard low mumbling sounds that she couldn't quite make out. It freaked her out, but she was able to ignore it. And I was like, lol, same. I asked if she had ever had any issues with her phone, laptop, the televisions, or the Wi-Fi, etc. while she'd been out here, and she said no. One thing that really creeped me out was the fact that these homeowners have a bunch of these Amazon/Alexa Echo Dot things around their house. The house would be dead silent and Alexa would say, "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Well, this happened at least 7 or 8 times in 5 days. I'm not familiar with these types of devices though, so maybe this is normal. On the last night that I was staying there, I was getting ready for bed and I just had this really gross feeling. I was uncomfortable the whole time, feeling like I was being watched while I was in the house. But last night was even more intense. At the same time, I was glad it was the last night and that I was leaving the next day. I was about to fall asleep when I heard their home security system alarming. I went down to see why, and it detected water in the basement. I went down and checked. no water, so I disarmed the system. About 20 minutes later, the alarm went off again, as I was about to fall asleep again. It said the same thing, so I checked the basement again. No water, I disarmed the alarm. At this point, I'm on edge because I don't know how to explain, but I felt like I was being taunted once again. The feeling kept going off once every 20 to 45 minutes and wouldn't stop. The homeowners called me at like 1:30 a.m. and told me they contacted ADT, the security company, and had them temporarily disarm the whole system for 48 hours. And I was like, awesome. Finally, I can get some sleep. About a half hour later, the alarm went off again. Only this time it was saying it detected water, heat, and smoke in the basement. I once again went down to check and everything was normal. No matter what I did, the alarm system kept ringing every few minutes throughout the entire night. I got zero sleep. I was so happy to leave. When I got back home in the evening, me and my boyfriend stepped out to get groceries. When we got in the car, his car stereo completely shut off and stopped working. He was confused because he'd been using it earlier that same evening with no problem. It took him about a day to figure it out and reset it. Last week was my birthday, so I had to renew my tabs and car registration. Kroger has Secretary of State kiosks you can pretty use quickly to renew your registration and whatnot. When it was processing my information, the kiosk glitched and completely shut down. I was stuck there for about 45 minutes trying to get it to work again. None of the Kroger workers could help me or do anything. After this, I knew that all of these couldn't be coincidences, and I texted my friend, same friend whose parents owned the house, about it, because I knew she would really get a kick. That's when she told me that her parents had to completely replace the Wi-Fi routers in their house the week they came back after I had house sat, and that it was weird because their router had given them zero issues before. There's other weird things and smaller details of what has happened in the last 2 weeks, but this post is already way long enough. Maybe these are all coincidences, but if so, they're really weird and unusual. While I have an interest in the paranormal, weird and unexplained, I've gone most of my 37 years without any experiences to share. I'm a rather normal guy living in the suburbs. I'm husband to my wife of about 10 years and father to a 4-year-old girl. I own a home that was built in the late 70s and we're the third family to live here. I have no information on the original owners, but the previous owners were middle-aged with 3 children. They never disclosed anything strange about the home, though they also failed to mention that the basement leaks during heavy rains, so who knows? I never experienced anything odd in the house for about 8 years, until recently. I've had 4 separate experiences in the last year or so, all within my bedroom in the middle of the night, where I would wake up and see something. I've never had visual hallucinations in my past. I don't dabble with drugs and haven't drank in nearly a year. I never enjoyed it much a day and decided to give it up. It was never a problem for me at all. I've been on sertraline for general anxiety disorder for about 5 years, and that's my only medication. I'm a very happy sleeper, and I rarely wake up in the middle of the night. During my first experience, I sat up in bed like I was reacting to a loud noise or tremor. I looked across the room, over to my wife, and saw a toddler, which I took for my daughter, poking its head up from behind my wife's torso, smiling at me. I can still clearly recall the face. The form faded away very slowly. I've never seen anything like that before. I always assumed that a hallucination would be instantaneous. I must have stared at this child for 10 seconds before it began to fade. The next 2 experiences were very similar to each other. I awoke in the middle of the night again and saw a woman standing beside the bed on my wife's side. Both times, this woman was wearing a white nightgown, but her features were cloaked in shadow. I got the impression that she was looking down at my wife. I felt a presence in the room, but I didn't feel eyes on me like with the child. Both times, the woman quickly faded away where she stood, faster than the child did. The final experience happened last night. Once again, I woke up in the middle of the night, around 3:30 a.m. I didn't sit up this time, but I looked across the room with my head still on my pillow. Sometimes when my daughter wakes up early, my wife will put her in bed with me to fall back asleep, and my wife will go out to work or start getting ready for work. When I saw that the bedroom door was open and that there was a woman looking at the bed, I assumed that my daughter was next to me and that my wife was starting her day. The woman left and the door closed. I reached across the bed to snuggle and was surprised to feel my wife next to me, fast asleep, though breathing heavily. I was now wide awake and alert. We have a security system which I knew was armed for the night, but I still listened very intently for footsteps down our creaky hallway, or the sound of the Barbiegator at the far end. Nothing. I got out of bed to check on my daughter, and she was also asleep. I went downstairs, room to room. Everything was in order. The last experience really shook me. I'm well aware of visual hallucinations upon waking up, sleep paralysis and all of the classic skepticism explanations to seeing what isn't actually there. I always figured that you would have to be a moron to think that such a hallucination was real. I also never put much belief into the concept of ghosts, though I personally hold out hope for some sort of afterlife and the possibility of being reached by that realm. I don't know what the hell I saw. A woman walked across my bedroom and closed the door behind her. It was as real as can be. I rarely remember my dreams, and I'm kind of attributing my experience to not being fully awake and hallucinating. But it's still damn spooky.